I came home from a 3-day cattle auction to find playground equipment being installed on my private ranch, next to a freshly painted sign reading, Riverside Community Park, open dawn to dusk. The woman directing the installation crew wore a coral blazer and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. And when she saw me, she actually had the audacity to hand me a park brochure with my own ranch photos on the cover. What she didn't know was that in exactly 6 hours, Governor Patricia Walsh would be arriving at my ranch for our monthly family dinner, because she happens to be my sister. My name is Marcus Sterling, and I've owned Riverside Ranch for the past 12 years. Ever since I retired from 22 years as a CIA intelligence analyst, you spend enough time tracking terrorist financing networks and international money laundering schemes. And eventually, you start craving something simple, something real. For me, that was 800 acres of Montana rangeland, where the biggest threat was usually weather, not weaponized finance. The ranch had been a foreclosure when I bought it, abandoned by developers who'd gone bust trying to turn it into a subdivision. I'd paid cash, restored the old farmhouse, brought in a small herd of Black Angus cattle, and figured I'd found my peace. The nearest neighbor was 2 miles away, and the closest thing to an HOA was the Riverside Estates development that had sprouted up on the adjacent land about 5 years after I'd moved in. I'd watched that development grow from my property line, keeping a careful eye on the surveys to make sure they didn't encroach. They'd named it after my ranch, which I found mildly annoying but legally meaningless. What I hadn't watched carefully enough was the HOA president they'd elected last year. Diane Fitzgerald was her name, and she looked exactly like what would happen if you gave a real estate agent a god complex and a clipboard. 53 years old. According to the voter registration I'd looked up after our first encounter, blonde hair maintained with religious dedication, nails that could double as weapons, and a wardrobe that screamed, I peaked as a pageant contestant in 1989 and never got over it. She was standing next to the playground equipment when I parked my truck, directing 2 confused workers who were trying to anchor a swing set into my pasture. Gentlemen, I said calmly, stepping out of the truck, you're going to want to stop what you're doing and pack up your equipment. Diane spun around, her practiced smile blazing like a flashbulb. Oh. Hello, you must be one of our new park visitors. I'm Diane Fitzgerald, president of the Riverside Estates Homeowners Association. Isn't it wonderful what we're doing for the community? I pulled out my phone and started recording. 22 years of intelligence work teaches you to document everything. Ma'am, I'm Marcus Sterling. I own this land, all 800 acres of it. You're currently trespassing on private property. Her smile didn't waver, but something predatory flickered in her eyes. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Mr. Sterling, was it? This land has been designated as a public recreational space by the Riverside Estates Community Development Initiative. We have all the proper paperwork. She produced a folder from her designer tote bag and pulled out what looked like official documents. I recognized the format immediately. I'd seen enough forged government papers in my career to spot them at 50 paces. These documents, I said, still recording, claim that this land was donated to the community trust. That's interesting, considering I never signed anything. Oh, but you did. Her voice had that sugary condescension that made my teeth hurt. Or rather, your representative did. When you failed to respond to our repeated notices about community beautification requirements, we were forced to take administrative action. I felt that familiar tingle at the base of my skull, the one that used to warn me when an asset was about to go sideways. What notices? The ones sent to your registered address? Of course. She pulled out another paper. According to our records, you live at 1847 Riverside Estates Drive. I live at 1847 Riverside Ranch Road. I corrected. Different road, different property, different universe from your HOA. Well, clerical errors happen, she said dismissively, but the community's needs supersede individual property claims when it comes to essential services. This park is essential for our property values. The workers had stopped installing the swing set and were watching our exchange with the universal expression of hourly employees who didn't sign up for this drama. Diane, I said slowly, I need you to understand something. You are currently committing criminal trespass, fraud, and theft of property. I'm giving you one chance to remove this equipment and leave. She actually laughed. Mr. Sterling, I don't think you understand how community development works. We've already announced the park opening. The mayor is coming to cut the ribbon next week. The local news is doing a feature on our initiative. You can't stop progress. The mayor of what? I asked. Genuinely curious about the depth of her delusion. Riverside Estates. Of course. Mayor Thompson is fully supportive of our community expansion. I had to hand it to her. She'd created an entire fictional government structure. Diane, Riverside Estates isn't a city. It doesn't have a mayor. It's a housing development with an HOA. We're an unincorporated community with self-governance rights. She said primly. Our charter clearly states, your charter has no authority over property you don't own. I interrupted. Now get off my land. She clutched her folder like a shield. This land was abandoned? You haven't developed it. You've let it sit here wasted when our children need somewhere to play. Selfish landowners like you are what's wrong with America. There it was. The self-righteous indignation of someone who'd convinced themselves that wanting something was the same as deserving it. Ma'am, one of the workers interjected nervously. Maybe we should. Continue with the installation, Diane snapped. I'll handle this obstructionist. I pulled out my phone again. This time to make a call. Sheriff Morrison? It's Marcus Sterling out at Riverside Ranch. I've got trespassers on my property, refusing to leave. Yes. They're actually installing playground equipment. No. I'm not joking. Diane's smile finally faltered. You're calling the police? How dare you? This is a community project. It's theft. I corrected. And fraud? And about 6 other crimes I can think of off the top of my head, while we waited for the sheriff. I did a little digging on my phone. The Riverside Estates HOA website was a masterpiece of delusion. They'd photoshopped my ranch into their community map, labeled it as Phase 2 Recreational Development, and even had a donation page where residents could contribute to the park fund. How much money have you collected for this park? I asked. Diane straightened proudly. Over $47. Zero. The community really came together for this project. So you've collected money for improvements to property you don't own? We own it morally, she said with a straight face. Sometimes legal technicalities have to give way to the greater good. I actually laughed. Did you just admit to fraud while I'm recording? Sheriff Morrison arrived with 2 deputies, and I've never been happier to see law enforcement. Jim Morrison and I went way back. He'd helped me deal with some cattle rustlers a few years ago, and I'd helped his department with some technical analysis on a drug trafficking case. Marcus, he said, stepping out of his cruiser. Want to explain why there's a playground in your pasture? I gestured to Diane. This is Diane Fitzgerald. She's decided my private property is a public park. Jim looked at the playground equipment, the workers, the sign, and then at Diane. Ma'am, do you own this land? The community owns it, she said defiantly. We've claimed it for public use. That's not how property law works, Jim said slowly, like he was explaining to a child. Do you have a deed, a purchase agreement, anything? Diane thrust her folder at him. I have all the documentation right here. Jim flipped through the papers, his expression growing more incredulous with each page. Ma'am, these aren't legal documents. This is just letterhead and clip art. Those are official Riverside Estates governmental documents, she insisted. Riverside Estates isn't a government, Jim said patiently. It's a housing development. You can't just declare someone's land to be yours. But it's for the children. Diane's voice rose to a shrill pitch. Don't you care about the children? I care about the law, Jim replied. And the law says this is theft. Marcus, do you want to press charges? Before I could answer, Diane pulled out her phone. I'm calling Mayor Thompson and Congressman Bradley. They'll explain to you how community development works. She stormed off to make her calls, while Jim and I watched the workers hastily start disassembling the playground equipment. Is she always like this? Jim asked. I honestly don't know. This is the most interaction I've had with the HOA. I paused. Jim, I need you to document everything. Take pictures. Get statements. Something tells me this isn't over. I was right. Over the next 3 hours, Diane made increasingly frantic phone calls to what seemed to be every authority figure she could think of. The Mayor Thompson turned out to be her brother-in-law, who owned a landscaping business. Congressman Bradley was a county commissioner she'd met once at a fundraiser. But the real entertainment came when she called the governor's office. "Yes, I need to speak to Governor Walsh immediately," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This is regarding the illegal obstruction of a community development project." "Yes, it's urgent." "What do you mean she's unavailable? This is Diane Fitzgerald, president of the Riverside Estates Governing Board." I checked my watch. Patricia would be leaving her office in Helena soon for the 2-hour drive to the ranch. Our monthly dinners were sacred, had been ever since her husband died in Afghanistan 15 years ago. She'd thrown herself into politics. I'd buried myself in intelligence work. And once a month we remembered we were family. "Ma'am," Jim said when Diane got off the phone, "I need you to leave the property now. The workers are packing up, and you need to go with them." "This is a conspiracy," Diane declared. "You're all in on it, protecting the wealthy landowners while children suffer without safe places to play. The children can play in the park in town," Jim suggested. "The one built on actual public land. That park is 3 miles away. Our children deserve better. They deserve proximity." She was still ranting when Jim gently but firmly escorted her to her white Lexus SUV. The workers finished loading their equipment and fled like they were escaping a natural disaster. "Marcus," Jim said before leaving, "you might want to get a lawyer. Something tells me she's not the type to give up." He was right. Of course, I spent the next 2 hours on the phone with my attorney, Rebecca Chen, who specialized in property law and had a side specialty in dealing with HOA overreach. "She actually installed playground equipment," Rebecca said, half laughing, half horrified, "without any legal authority, and collected $47,000 from residents for improvements to my land." I added, "That's wire fraud, if any of it crossed state lines. Mail fraud, if she used the postal service. Regular fraud, regardless." Rebecca paused. "Send me everything you've documented. This is going to be fun." By the time I got off the phone, I had just enough time to start dinner before Patricia arrived. Nothing fancy, grilled steaks, roasted vegetables. The kind of simple meal we'd grown up with. I was just pulling the steaks off the grill when I heard her security detail pulling up the drive. Patricia stepped out of the black SUV looking every inch the governor, tailored suit. Perfect hair. That commanding presence that had won her 2 terms by landslide margins. But the moment she saw me, the politician melted away, and she was just my big sister. "Marcus," she hugged me tight. "God, it's good to see you. You would not believe the day I've had." "Let me guess," I said, hugging her back. "Some crazy woman called about a community development crisis?" She pulled back, eyes wide. "How did you?" "Wait, don't tell me that was about you." "Come on," I said, leading her inside. "I'll explain over dinner." Patricia's security detail did their usual sweep and took up their positions while we settled at the kitchen table. I'd sent them all the background checks years ago, force of habit from my CIA days, and we'd developed an easy rhythm. They did their job. I fed them. Everyone was happy. "So," Patricia said, cutting into her steak, "tell me about this community development crisis that had someone calling my office demanding I intervene." I pulled up the videos on my tablet and showed her the whole afternoon's drama. She watched with growing amazement as Diane declared my ranch a public park, claimed governmental authority for a housing development, and accused law enforcement of conspiracy. "She actually said Riverside Estates has a mayor?" Patricia asked. Incredulous. "Her brother-in-law. Apparently, he runs Thompson Landscaping. And she collected money from residents? $47,000 for park improvements. On my land. That she doesn't own." Patricia put down her fork. "Marcus, please tell me you're pressing charges. My lawyer's working on it, but I have a feeling this isn't over. Someone that delusional doesn't just give up." "No." Patricia agreed. "They escalate. Remember that guy in Billings who declared his backyard a sovereign nation? At least he stayed on his own property." I pointed out. We were halfway through dinner when Patricia's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and frowned. "My press secretary. Someone's been calling reporters about a land rights crisis in Riverside County." "3 guesses who?" I muttered. Patricia's phone buzzed again. And again. She finally picked it up. "What's Oh, you've got to be kidding me. She turned the phone to show me. Someone had started a social media campaign, number Save Riverside Park, was trending locally, complete with photos of sad-looking children and captions about greedy landowners stealing community spaces. She works fast. I admitted, this is defamation. Patricia said, scrolling through the posts. And, wait, is that a GoFundMe? It was. Emergency fund to save Riverside Park from corporate greed. It had already raised $8,000 in 3 hours. She's literally fundraising on my land theft. I said, oddly impressed by the audacity. Patricia set her phone down. Okay. This has officially crossed from delusional to criminal. Do you want me to? No. I said quickly. No official intervention? You know how that would look. Like the governor using her position to help her brother. Yeah. Patricia sighed. But Marcus, this woman is… The security detail's radios crackled. Ma'am, we have vehicles approaching. 3. No. 5 cars. They're stopping at the gate. I pulled up my security camera app. 5 cars were indeed at my gate, and people were getting out with signs. Signs that read, Save Our Park, and Public Land for Public Good. Is she organizing a protest on your property? Patricia asked. Watching over my shoulder. Looks like it. I watched as more cars arrived. How did she even organize this so fast? Patricia's phone rang. Her press secretary again. Governor, we have a situation. Local news just picked up a story about you having dinner at the site of a community park dispute. They're asking for a statement. How the hell did they know I was here? Patricia asked. I zoomed in on one of the protesters. She was live streaming. Diane's at the gate with a camera crew. Of course she is. Patricia said. Because that's not stalking at all. Ma'am? The security detail leader appeared in the doorway. We recommend leaving through the back route. Absolutely not. Patricia said firmly. I'm not sneaking out of my brother's house like I'm doing something wrong. Pat. I said warningly. No. Marcus. This woman has crossed every line, trespassing, fraud, theft. And now she's trying to ambush me at a private dinner? Patricia stood up. I think it's time, miss. Fitzgerald learned about consequences. What are you going to do? Patricia smiled. It was the same smile she'd had when she'd caught the Thompson twins putting firecrackers in our mailbox when we were kids. I'm going to give her exactly what she wants. Media attention. Before I could stop her, Patricia was striding out the front door, her security detail scrambling to keep up. I followed, grabbing my phone to record whatever was about to happen. Diane was at my gate with about 30 protesters and a camera crew from the local CBS affiliate. The moment she saw Patricia approaching, her face lit up like Christmas morning. Governor Walsh, she called out, waving frantically. Governor, thank you for coming. We need your help to save this vital community resource. Patricia walked right up to the gate, calm and composed. The cameras swung toward her. Good evening, she said pleasantly. I understand there's some confusion about this property. There's no confusion, Diane said quickly. This land has been designated as a community park. We have documents, forged documents. Patricia interrupted smoothly. I've seen them. Miss Fitzgerald, are you aware that falsifying government documents is a federal crime? Diane's smile flickered. I don't know what you mean. These are official. They're not, Patricia said firmly. Riverside Estates is not a municipality. It has no governmental authority. It cannot claim private land for public use. What you've done is commit fraud. But the community needs leaders who respect the law. Patricia said, not someone who steals private property and defrauds residents out of thousands of dollars. The reporter, sensing blood in the water, pushed forward. Governor, can you elaborate on the fraud allegations? Patricia smiled. I'm here having dinner with my brother, Marcus Sterling, who owns this ranch. Today, Miss Fitzgerald trespassed on his property, attempted to install playground equipment without permission, and claimed she had the authority to seize his land. She's also collected over $50,000 from residents for improvements to property she doesn't own. $47,000. I corrected from behind her, plus the $8,000 from the GoFundMe she started 3 hours ago. Patricia added, That's $55,000 collected under false pretenses. The crowd was starting to murmur. Some of the protesters were lowering their signs, looking confused. "Did you donate to this park fund?" the reporter asked one of them. $500? The woman admitted. "We were told it was for our children." "Your children deserve a real park," Patricia said gently. "Built legally, on actual public land, not stolen from a private citizen." "This is character assassination," Diane shrieked. "You're protecting your brother because he's rich and connected." "My brother is a retired federal employee who bought this ranch with his savings," Patricia said calmly. "He's not rich. He's not a corporation. He's a private citizen whose property rights you violated." "But what about the greater good?" Diane demanded. "Sometimes individual rights have to give way to community needs." Patricia's expression hardened. "Miss Fitzgerald, that's exactly the kind of thinking that leads to authoritarianism. In America, we don't seize private property because we want it. We follow the law. The law protects the wealthy," Diane shouted. "The law protects everyone," Patricia corrected, "including the residents you defrauded." That's when the situation took a turn. One of the protesters, a man in his 60s, pushed forward. "What? Are you saying the park isn't real? I donated $1,000. The park was never real," I said, stepping up beside Patricia. "This is my ranch. I never agreed to any park." She made it all up. The crowd erupted. Suddenly, Diane wasn't facing supporters, she was facing angry victims. "You told us the land was donated. You said it was all legal. I want my money back." Diane backed toward her Lexus, but the reporter followed. "Miss Fitzgerald, did you collect money for improvements to land you don't own?" "I was acting in the community's best interest," Diane said desperately. "By lying to them?" the reporter pressed. Patricia stepped back, letting the scene unfold. The protesters had become an angry mob, demanding answers, and Diane was scrambling to get to her car. "This isn't over," she shouted as she fumbled with her keys. "I'll sue. I'll go to the federal government. This land should belong to the people." She managed to get in her car and peel out. Leaving behind a crowd of confused and angry former supporters, the reporter turned to Patricia. "Governor Walsh, what happens now?" "Now," Patricia said, "I finish having dinner with my brother. As for Miss Fitzgerald, I suspect she'll be busy with law enforcement. Fraud is a serious crime, especially when it involves this much money and this many victims. Will you be taking any official action?" "I don't need to," Patricia said simply. "The law enforcement agencies in this county are perfectly capable of handling fraud cases. I'm just here for a family dinner." We walked back to the house, leaving the crowd to disperse. The camera crew packed up, having gotten far more story than they'd expected. "Well," Patricia said, as we sat back down to our now cold steaks, "that was more exciting than usual." "You know she's not done," I said. "People like that don't just give up." "No," Patricia agreed. "But she's got bigger problems now. Those residents are going to want their money back. And when they don't get it..." She was right. By the next morning, the story had exploded. "OA President's Land Grab Exposed" was the headline in the local paper. The CBS footage of angry residents demanding their money back played on a loop. The GoFundMe was frozen pending investigation. Rebecca called me at 7 a.m. "Marcus, you need to see the county clerk's website." I pulled it up on my laptop. There, in the public records, were dozens of liens filed by Riverside Estates HOA against properties in the development, all signed by Diane Fitzgerald, all dated within the last year. She's been using fake fines to put liens on people's houses. Rebecca said if they didn't pay, she could theoretically foreclose, but the HOA doesn't have that authority. I said, "No." But the homeowners didn't know that. "Marcus, this is a pattern. Your ranch wasn't her first attempted theft. It was just her biggest." By noon, the sheriff's department had opened a formal investigation. By 3 p.m., they had a warrant for Diane's arrest. By 5 p.m., she was in custody, charged with multiple counts of fraud, theft by deception, and filing false liens. The story should have ended there. But Diane had one more card to play. 2 days later, I was served with a lawsuit. Diane, from her jail cell, was suing me for intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, and conspiracy to deprive the community of essential services. She's representing herself, Rebecca said, reading through the complaint, and it's, wow, she's citing maritime law, and the Magna Carta, and something called community right of conquest. Is any of it real? The paper it's printed on is real. That's about it. Rebecca shook her head. She's also suing your sister for abuse of governmental power. Patricia laughed when I told her, let her sue. It'll give the federal prosecutors more evidence of her mental state. The lawsuit went nowhere. Of course, the judge dismissed it with prejudice, which meant Diane couldn't refile it. But the investigation into her activities kept expanding. It turned out the Riverside Estates HOA had been operating as Diane's personal kingdom for 2 years. She'd installed her friends in every board position, changed the bylaws without proper votes, and imposed increasingly bizarre rules that came with hefty fines. One resident had been fined $500 for having the wrong shade of beige on their mailbox. Another had been hit with a $1,000 penalty for excessive bird attraction because they had a bird feeder. The money had gone into accounts controlled solely by Diane. She collected over $300,000 in fake fines, the prosecutor told me, and spent most of it on personal expenses, vacations, jewelry, cosmetic procedures. What about the $47,000 for the park? Already frozen. It'll be returned to the victims as part of the restitution. The federal charges came a month later. Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, tax evasion, the list went on. Diane had been so confident in her scheme that she'd never bothered to hide her tracks. The trial was almost anticlimactic. Diane insisted on representing herself, which meant we got to watch her argue that she had sovereign authority over Riverside Estates and that my ranch was abandoned land subject to homestead claims. The judge, a patient woman named Helen Torres, listened to Diane's opening statement with the expression of someone watching a slow-motion train wreck. Miss Fitzgerald, Judge Torres finally interrupted. Are you arguing that you had the legal right to seize private property? I'm arguing that community needs supersede individual greed, Diane declared. That's not a legal argument. The judge said patiently, it's a moral argument. This is a court of law, not philosophy. The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented mountains of evidence, forged documents, fraudulent liens, bank records showing personal spending of HOA funds. Diane's defense consisted mainly of speeches about community values and accusations that everyone was conspiring against her. When it came time for my testimony, Diane tried to cross-examine me herself. Mr. Sterling, she said, approaching the witness stand, isn't it true that you've lived on that ranch for 12 years without developing it? I raise cattle. I said, that's development, but no houses, no community benefit. It's a ranch. Ranches don't have subdivisions. So you admit you're hoarding land that could house families. I admit I own land that I use for its intended purpose. She spun toward the jury. See, he admits it. He's keeping valuable land from the community. The prosecutor objected. The judge sustained. Diane was warned about making speeches instead of asking questions. Mr. Sterling. Diane tried again. What gives you the right to own so much land? The deed? I said simply, the same legal document that gives everyone the right to own property. But don't you think that's unfair? No. Why not? Because property rights are fundamental to a free society. Without them, anyone could take anything from anyone else just by claiming they needed it more. Like Robin Hood, Diane said triumphantly. Robin Hood was a thief. I pointed out, he's only a hero in fiction. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Diane was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to all her victims. At the sentencing, she gave a 40-minute speech about how history would vindicate her and how she was a martyr for community rights. The judge let her finish, then added 2 years for showing no remorse. The Riverside Estates HOA was dissolved by unanimous vote of the actual homeowners. They formed a new organization with strict bylaws, term limits, and transparent finances. The first thing they did was pass a resolution apologizing to me for the attempted theft of property by the previous administration. I told them no apology was necessary. They were victims too. 6 months later, Patricia and I were having our monthly dinner when she brought up something interesting. You know the land next to your ranch? The one the developers abandoned? The 300 acres to the south? It's going up for auction. County seized it for back taxes. She smiled. Thought you might be interested? I don't need more land. Pat. No. But the community might. What if someone bought it and donated it for an actual public park? Legal. Above board. With proper ownership and management? I thought about it. That's a lot of money. There's a federal grant for rural community development. I can't be involved. Obviously. But you could apply. You want me to help build the park Diane pretended to create? I want you to show people how it's actually done. Legally. Properly. With respect for everyone's rights. It took a year. But we did it. The Sterling Community Park, named after my father, not me, opened with 300 acres of trails, playgrounds, sports fields, and picnic areas. The Riverside Estates residents were thrilled. Even some of Diane's former supporters volunteered to help with the construction. The best part? We put up a plaque at the entrance. This park was built through legal means, with respect for property rights and proper governmental process, dedicated to the principle that in America, we achieve community goods through cooperation, not coercion. Patricia spoke at the dedication. This park represents what can happen when we work together within the law, when we respect each other's rights, and when we remember that the ends don't justify the means. I stood in the back, watching kids play on equipment that was actually supposed to be there, on land that was actually meant for public use. It felt good. It felt right. Jim Morrison found me after the ceremony. You know, Marcus, you could have just let her have a corner of your ranch for a park. Saved everyone a lot of trouble. Could have. I agreed. But then she would have learned that theft works if you wrap it in enough righteous indignation. How many more properties would she have seized? How many more people would she have defrauded? Fair point. Jim conceded. Still, 8 years seems harsh. She stole over $300,000 and tried to steal 800 acres of land. I reminded him, if she'd robbed a bank for that much, would 8 years seem harsh? I suppose not. The only difference is she used a clipboard instead of a gun. That night, Patricia and I had dinner at the ranch as usual. We could see the lights from the new park in the distance, hear the faint sounds of families enjoying the evening. Think Diane's learning anything in prison? Patricia asked. Probably filing lawsuits, claiming the prison is illegally detaining a sovereign citizen. I said. We both laughed. But there was a sadness to it. Diane Fitzgerald had been so consumed by her vision of what the community needed that she'd forgotten the community was made up of individuals with rights. She'd been so sure of her moral superiority that she'd convinced herself laws didn't apply to her cause. You know what the ironic part is? I said. If she'd come to me, explained that the community needed a park, asked if I'd be willing to sell or donate some land, I might have considered it. Instead, she tried to take it. Pride. Patricia said simply, it's always pride. The belief that you know better than everyone else, that your vision is so important it justifies anything. Remember what Dad used to say? The road to hell is paved with good intentions and lined with other people's property rights. Patricia smiled. He was a wise man. He would have hated what happened here. He would have been proud of how you handled it. Patricia corrected. You stood your ground without becoming vindictive. You helped build something positive out of a negative situation. That's Dad's legacy right there. We finished dinner and Patricia headed back to Helena, her security detail melting out of the shadows to escort her. I stood on my porch, looking out over my ranch. Still my ranch. Despite Diane Fitzgerald's best efforts. The truth is, I could have handled it differently. I could have put up bigger fences, hired security, made the ranch a fortress. But that would have let her win in a different way. It would have let her turn me into the selfish landowner she'd painted me as. Instead, I'd stood firm on principles while helping create something the community actually needed. The park existed now, built on land, legally acquired, serving families who knew it was theirs by right, not by theft. Sometimes I drive by the federal prison where Diane is serving her sentence. I don't visit, there's nothing to say. But I wonder if she ever understands where she went wrong, if she ever realizes that in her zealous pursuit of the greater good, She became exactly the kind of tyrant America was founded to oppose. Probably not. True believers rarely change their minds, even when reality proves them wrong. They just convince themselves that reality is the problem. But the kids playing in Sterling Community Park don't care about any of that. They just know they have a safe, legal place to play. The families having picnics don't think about property rights and legal processes. They just enjoy their afternoon. And that's how it should be. The law working quietly in the background, protecting everyone's rights, letting people live their lives in peace. It's not dramatic. It's not exciting. It's just civilization. My ranch is still here. Still, 800 acres of Montana grassland with black Angus cattle grazing in the pastures. Still my piece of the American dream, bought and paid for, protected by law and tradition. Diane Fitzgerald tried to take it with forged documents and moral certainty. She failed because in America, wanting something isn't enough. You have to acquire it legally. You have to respect other people's rights. You have to work within the system, not declare yourself above it. It's not a perfect system, but it's better than one where people like Diane can simply take what they want because they've convinced themselves they deserve it. The governor's sister joke still makes the rounds sometimes. People ask if Patricia intervened, if I got special treatment because of who I'm related to. The truth is simpler. I got the same treatment any property owner should get when someone tries to steal their land. The law protected me because that's what law is for. Diane's HOA kingdom is gone. Her bank accounts are frozen. Her reputation is destroyed. All because she couldn't accept that owning something means others can't take it, no matter how much they think they need it. Meanwhile, I still have my monthly dinners with Patricia. We still sit at the same table, in the same kitchen, on the same ranch that Diane tried to steal. We talk about family, about work, about everything except that one crazy afternoon when an HOA president decided my property was hers, because in the end, that's all she was, a footnote in the story of this ranch. A cautionary tale about what happens when someone mistakes their desires for rights, their wants for needs, their vision for reality. The ranch endures. The law endures. And somewhere in a federal prison, Diane Fitzgerald is probably still writing lawsuits claiming she was right all along. She wasn't. She never was. And that's the real lesson of this story. Being passionate about a cause doesn't make you right. Being certain doesn't make you correct. And believing you're serving the greater good doesn't give you the right to trample on individual rights. It just makes you a well-intentioned criminal. And in America, we have a word for those. Inmates. 3 years later, I thought the Diane Fitzgerald chapter of my life was closed. The ranch was peaceful. The community park was thriving. And I'd even started dating again. A veterinarian named Sarah who found the whole story hilarious. That's when the letter arrived. It came on official Bureau of Prisons letterhead, which made me open it immediately. Inside was a handwritten note from Diane Fitzgerald. Her formerly perfect penmanship, now cramped and urgent. Mr. Sterling, I need your help. There's been a terrible misunderstanding about my case. I've discovered evidence of a conspiracy against me involving the judge, the prosecutor, and several government officials. As a former CIA analyst, you must understand how these shadow operations work. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I'm asking for justice. The real criminals are still out there, and they're coming for your ranch next. Signed, Diane Fitzgerald. Political prisoner number 47,829, -083. I showed the letter to Sarah over dinner. She read it twice, eyebrows climbing higher each time. She thinks she's a political prisoner? Sarah asked. Apparently, and I'm supposed to investigate this shadow conspiracy. The woman who tried to steal your ranch wants you to help her? The human mind's capacity for self-delusion is truly remarkable. I said, but the letter bothered me, not because I believed her conspiracy theories, but because it meant she hadn't learned anything. 3 years in federal prison, and she was still convinced she was the victim. I forwarded the letter to Rebecca, my attorney, who called me within an hour. Marcus, she's been sending these to everyone. The judge, the prosecutor, the FBI, even the governor's office. She's filed 17 lawsuits from prison, all dismissed as frivolous. She's becoming a problem for the prison system. How so? She's organized the other inmates into what she calls a property rights coalition. She teaches classes on sovereign citizenship and community reclamation. The warden's at his wit's end. I couldn't help but laugh. Even in prison, Diane had created her own little kingdom. 2 weeks later, Jim Morrison stopped by the ranch with news that didn't surprise me at all. Diane's followers are at it again, he said, accepting a cup of coffee. 3 of her former HOA board members have started a new organization. They're calling it the Community Land Trust Initiative. Let me guess, they want to reclaim abandoned properties for public use? You got it. They've already targeted 2 ranches in the next county. Same playbook, fake documents, social media campaigns, showing up with construction equipment, and both ranchers called the sheriff immediately. Arrests were made. Turns out, copying Diane's methods while she's serving time for those exact methods isn't brilliant legal strategy. But the story took a darker turn when one of Diane's prison converts got released. Angela Patterson, convicted of check fraud, had become Diane's most devoted disciple. Within a month of her release, she was at my gate. I watched her on the security cameras, a woman in her 40s, holding a thick folder and wearing what looked like a homemade uniform with Community Land Inspector embroidered on the pocket. "Mr. Sterling," she said into the intercom, "I'm here for the mandatory property assessment. Please open the gate." "There's no such thing as a mandatory property assessment," I replied, under Community Statute 314. Tch. All properties over 50 acres must undergo biannual inspection for public use potential. That statute doesn't exist. It does in the Sovereign Community Code, which supersedes your illegal government regulations. I called Jim. "We've got another one." Angela Patterson was arrested for trespassing, impersonating a government official, and possession of forged documents. During her booking, she declared that Diane Fitzgerald was a political prophet and that history would vindicate their movement. That's when I realized we had a bigger problem. Diane wasn't just a failed HOA president anymore. She was becoming a cult leader, spreading her twisted ideology from her prison cell. Patricia and I discussed it during our next dinner. "She's created a mythology around herself," Patricia said. "The righteous crusader imprisoned by the corrupt system. It appeals to people who feel powerless, who want to believe there's a simple solution to complex problems. Take what you want and claim it's for the greater good?" Exactly. It's the same appeal that every demagogue in history has used. The system is rigged against you. But I know the secret truth that will set you free. What do we do about it? Patricia thought for a moment. We keep telling the truth. We keep showing that the system works when people work within it. We built that park legally, and it serves more people than Diane's schemes ever would have. She was right. But I still worried about the next Angela Patterson, the next true believer who would show up at someone's gate with forged documents and absolute certainty. The answer came from an unexpected source, Cheryl Williams, one of the original Riverside Estates residents who'd been defrauded by Diane, approached me at the park one afternoon. "Mr. Sterling, I've been thinking, what if we started an education program, teaching people about property rights, how HOAs actually work, what's legal and what isn't? You want to prevent the next Diane Fitzgerald? I want to prevent the next us," she said firmly. We were so ignorant about our rights, about the law. We believed her because we didn't know better. That can't happen again. And so the Sterling Community Education Initiative was born. Once a month, volunteer lawyers and law enforcement officers taught free classes at the community center. Property law, HOA regulations, how to spot fraud, when to call authorities. The first class had 10 attendees. Within 6 months, we were filling the room. Jim Morrison taught a session on recognizing fake documents. If someone claims governmental authority but can't show you the actual law they're citing, that's your first red flag. Rebecca Chen explained property rights. No one can take your property without due process. Not for the greater good. Not for the community. Not for any reason without following legal procedures. Even Patricia came to speak. Not as the governor, but as a citizen. The system isn't perfect, but it exists to protect all of us. When someone tells you they've found a way around it, they're telling you they've found a way to victimize you. The program had an unexpected effect. Property fraud attempts in our county dropped by 60% within a year. Turns out, educated citizens make poor victims. But Diane wasn't done. 5 years into her sentence, she managed to get an interview with a documentary filmmaker who was doing a piece on victims of the property system. She presented herself as a visionary who'd tried to create affordable community spaces only to be crushed by wealthy landowners and their political connections. The filmmaker called me for comment. I agreed to an interview, but only if they also interviewed her victims she stole from us. Robert Chen told the camera. Not for the community, but for herself. She used our trust in the system against us. I nearly lost my home to her fake liens. Martha Rodriguez added, "How is that serving the greater good?" The documentary, when it aired, wasn't the vindication Diane had hoped for. It was titled, "The HOA Tyrant: How Good Intentions Became Criminal Actions." Diane responded by suing the filmmaker, the network, the victims who'd appeared, and somehow, me again. All dismissed. Of course, today, 10 years after that afternoon when I found playground equipment in my pasture, the ranch is still mine. The community park is entering its second expansion phase, funded entirely through legal means. The education program has spread to 3 neighboring counties, and Diane, she was released last year. Having served 7 years with good behavior, she moved to Arizona, where last I heard, she was working at a property management company. That last bit worried me until Jim called with an update. She's actually doing legitimate work, he said. Apparently prison gave her time to think. She's even taking night classes in actual property law. You believe she's reformed? I believe she realized that understanding the real law is more powerful than making up your own. I hope that's true. I hope she learned that passion without knowledge is dangerous, that certainty without humility is destructive, that the greater good can't be built on a foundation of theft and lies. But I still have those security cameras, and I still keep all my documents in a fireproof safe. Because while I believe in redemption, I also believe in being prepared. The ranch remains my sanctuary, the place where I found peace after a career spent tracking financial criminals around the globe. Sometimes when I'm riding the fence line, checking on the cattle, I think about that afternoon when Diane Fitzgerald tried to take it all away. She failed because America, for all its flaws, is still a nation of laws. Property rights still matter. Individual liberty still counts. And no amount of righteous rhetoric can change the fundamental truth that taking what isn't yours is theft. Whether you do it with a gun or a clipboard, the real lesson isn't just about property law or HOA overreach. It's about the eternal tension between individual rights and collective desires, between what we want and what we're entitled to, between our vision for society and the rights of others to disagree. Diane thought she could resolve that tension by simply declaring herself right and everyone else wrong. She learned the hard way that in a free society, that's not how it works. Meanwhile, the kids still play in Sterling Community Park, legally built on legally purchased land. The community education program still meets monthly, teaching citizens their rights and responsibilities. And somewhere in Arizona, a former federal inmate is hopefully learning to work within the system she once tried to overthrow. That's the American way, not perfect, often messy, but ultimately protective of the rights that let us all pursue our different dreams on our own patches of earth. My ranch, my rules, my right, and no HOA president, no matter how righteous they feel, can change that fundamental truth.